It's all business with these wide receiver rankings. We have injury news, we have new quarterbacks, and we have a lot to update. So we're going to start off with tier one where there's nothing to update. We're still going to have Chase, Jefferson, Lamb. Chase is the easy pick. Obviously, you're looking at a receiver that last year was the wide receiver one in points per game with about 23.71. And you get Joe Burrow yet again this season. So you're one of the best wide receivers in the league, if not the best. And you have arguably a top 5 quarterback in the NFL as well. Passing volume should be there. Defense isn't good. There's nothing to discuss. Now, our second wide receiver, I would make an argument that he is the best wide receiver in the NFL. If we're just looking at the site, every single year in his career, he's had at least 2.5 yards per route run. And every single season, he's had at least a 26% team target share. Justin Jefferson is insane. The thing is, McCarthy's a black box, right? Like McCarthy probably is going to be better than Darnold was, but we just have no guarantee whatsoever. So I'm not going to be able to rank Jefferson at 1, even if I think he's potentially a better talent than Chase, because the quarterback play isn't as certain as what you have with Burrow. And then our third wide receiver here, if you wanted to put him at 1, you do you, because honestly, last time we had a fully healthy season from Dak Prescott in 2023, CeeDee Lamb averaged 23.72 fantasy points per game. We go and look at what Jamar Chase did this past year. Jamar Chase was at 23.71. So we've seen the ceiling from CeeDee Lamb be just as high as anything that Jamar Chase has ever put out. The issue is we've seen a lower floor with Lamb, where this past year you get 17.5 fantasy points. 2 years back, 17.5 fantasy points. No matter what, he's going to be a wide receiver one in fantasy. And your bet between these three guys is which one just turns out to be the wide receiver one overall. But I'd be surprised if any of them weren't a wide receiver one in fantasy. Now, going over and looking at what we have with tier 2, we're going to have Puka. Nothing's changed. I mean, with Puka, still had 4.07 yards per route run this past season. I know a lot of people are excited about Devontae Adams, but Puka has established himself as a true elite wide receiver that it honestly doesn't matter who he's running alongside, whether it's Kupp or 32-year-old Adams. Malik Neighbors was previously behind Amon-Ra St. Brown for us. However, we have flipped this. I was going to have that hot take where give me Amon-Ra St. Brown, the wide receiver with back-to-back finishes as a top 5 option. But now you have the offensive line looking a little bit worse in Detroit. And we got the report that Amon-Ra St. Brown did have surgery this offseason. So I'm just going to flip them. I'm not going to try to make some hot take with having St. Brown ahead of Malik Neighbors now. Neighbors was the wide receiver 7 with a 34.9% team target share last season. I have never seen anything like this. A 34.9% team target share is insane for any wide receiver, let alone a rookie option. And now you arguably have a better quarterback situation with the combination of Russell Wilson as well as Jackson Dart. It's probably going to be bad, but I mean, it was horrible last year. Amon-Ra St. Brown, safe name, back-to-back top 5 finishes, 3 straight top 10 finishes. But again, you do have some potential injury concern. And at the same time, this could be a worse offense with the different offensive coordinator, with the downgraded offensive line. And I don't know if he has the same type of ceiling that you're going to get with Malik Neighbors. And he may not even have the same type of ceiling that you're going to get with a player like Nico Collins. Because we go back and look at last season. In the games in which Nico Collins went and played at least 70% of the snaps, he finishes the wide receiver 13, 4, 37, 1, 10, 12, 22, 33, and 50. But we had seen Nico give you that true elite ceiling when he was fully healthy. Now, you do have 2 extra rookies coming in, as well as Christian Kirk with the veteran presence. So I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if Nico Collins kind of remains around a 25% team target share. Full transparency, I think he's probably a better real-life wide receiver than Amon-Ra St. Brown. I just think St. Brown scores more fantasy points. And then going over and looking at Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas last year was the wide receiver 12 from a points per game perspective, but that was with no Trevor Lawrence for a good section of the year. Now, I still think the Jags offense is probably not going to be the best, but realistically, they'll probably be a better team this year than they were last year when they finished as a bottom 5 unit overall. Now, going over and looking at what we have with our third tier of receivers, Drake London finishes as the wide receiver 14, and I've actually drafted a crap ton of London. I will be honest, though, I am a little bit concerned if you're looking at the splits with and without Michael Penix to just think that, oh, okay, the numbers with Michael Penix, that's what we should expect this next season. Because you do have a game in week 18 that's really skewing the data set here, where in 18, Drake London drops 40 fantasy points, 18 targets, 10 receptions, 180 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, a 4.92 yards per target, right? So if you're trying to look at like a super small sample of like, oh, Michael Penix was the quarterback for these 3 games, and this is what London did in this 3-game sample, it's probably too small to try to extrapolate that through the entire season. But London has established himself as a phenomenal receiver. He's like younger than RJ Harvey still. And again, like I said, still incredibly young, was the wide receiver 14 from a points per game perspective last year, and possibly his better quarterback play with Michael Penix. But similar to JJ McCarthy, while we have upside at quarterback, we just simply don't know. I'm looking at A.J. Brown, pretty damn confident A.J. Brown is one of the best receivers in the league. You go back to last season, the dude had 3.16 yards per route run. We go back to last year, 34.4% of his team's target share. So with A.J. Brown, these underlying advanced metrics tell me he is just as good as he's ever been. Now, yes, the 16.5 fantasy points this past year was lower than what we had in 2023, lower than what we had in 2022. But in reality, the Philadelphia Eagles threw the ball the least amount in the entire NFL. So if we are projecting this offense going into this next season, if Barkley gets injured, if the defense is any worse at all, if the games are any closer at all, the Philadelphia Eagles have only one solution, and that's to throw the ball a little bit more. So I think that A.J. Brown could very easily be better than he was last year. And he's not like the age where you're expecting some natural fall off at this point. And then with Ladd McConkey, you get the breakout in the second half of the season where through the first 7 weeks, it's not like Ladd was anything special, right? 14, 4, 7, 17, 8, 9 fantasy points. But I guess you can really look at the breakout maybe coming in like week 11, because from week 11 onwards, in the games where Ladd McConkey was healthy and he played, you have 18, 14, 20, 16, 14, 29, 16 fantasy points. Obviously, look good in the NFL playoffs as well. And this is typically what you are wanting to bank on for those players that take a step forward and reach that true elite level ceiling, is you want those wide receivers going into year 2 that had decent NFL draft capital, that flashed strong at the end of the rookie season. Maybe an example of this with a player that didn't have as good as draft capital as what you had with Ladd, but you go back and look at Amon-Ra St. Brown's rookie year, where St. Brown really didn't do anything through the first 12 weeks, but then in the last section of the season, you have 24, 15, 23, 26, 35, 26 fantasy points. And then what happens the following year for Amon-Ra St. Brown in 2022? He's the wide receiver 10 in points per game. So I think Ladd McConkey, great bet in underdog drafts in the middle of the second round. If I was in the flock league in the middle of the second round, I may go with the running back here instead. I may go someone like Taylor, I may go someone like Jacobs. But obviously in underdog basketball drafts, those wide receivers are going to get steamed up a bit. Now, there's a big teardrop between Ladd McConkey and the next group of receivers. And you'll actually see this in underdog drafts specifically, where like the first 19 players off the board are almost identical every single time. And then once you get to pick 20 through like pick 30, you'll see this in the live stream. We're streaming the drafts every single night, of course. That's like the do whatever you want zone, where if you wanted to go Rice, if you wanted to go Tyreek, if you wanted to go Devontae Adams, I'm not going to scream at you that you need to go in one direction or another. This is the first time that you're going to see a tier is pretty damn big. I would love to know, if you've been drafting those teams on Underdog, what wide receiver in this range you personally prefer, because that's going to be, in my opinion, maybe the key to differentiating yourself against the rest of the crowd in the early rounds, is trying to figure out where the landmines or the targets are in this range. And of course, if you're not already drafting fantasy teams, I would start practicing for your main draft right now. I understand your redraft league's not going to be until August. It's not going to be until September, but you can hop in some underdog best ball drafts at the moment, and there's no time commitment at all during the season. Your best starting lineups automatically submitted for you at the end of every single week. That's how I won a decent amount of money on Underdog back in the day. And we're streaming drafts every single night, of course. So if you wanted to draft with us, I'll leave a link in the description and the comment section where it says join a draft with us here. If you use promo code FLOCK to join Underdog Fantasy, you're not only going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000, but you're also going to be getting all of my 2025 fantasy football rankings, draft guide cheat sheets for your ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, etc., leagues. Now let's move this over to tier 4 with Rashid Rice. Rice, the biggest riser that we've had since the last time we made this video. Simply put, looks like one, Rashid Rice is not going to get suspended this year, which that was a concern last time I made these rankings, or at least I thought it was. And two, I was concerned a bit about Rashid Rice's health, but he's out there practicing fully right now. They're saying that, yeah, there are no limitations whatsoever for Rashid Rice going into week 1. And you go back and you look at what Rice did in a very small sample last year. But last year, it looked like Rashid Rice was going to win people leagues. You had him with 17 fantasy points, 18 fantasy points, then 29 fantasy points against the Atlanta Falcons. And then obviously you have Patrick Mahomes just jumping into his knee. But even looking at his rookie season, it was very reminiscent of what we had with Amon-Ra St. Brown, with what we had with Ladd McConkey, where with Rice did nothing really through the first 11 weeks. I mean, you only had one game where he played more than 60% of the snaps and 0 games where he played 70% of the snaps in the first 11 weeks of his rookie season. But once he started playing 70% of the snaps, that was week 12. And you had 25 fantasy points, 14.5, 18, 24.5, 12, and 17.5. So you had the late rookie breakout for Rashid Rice, followed up with what flashed to be a potential league-winning season at the beginning of his second year. So going into year 3, if he is truly healthy, and if you don't have to worry about a suspension, Rashid Rice looks like he is set up to absolutely crush in both your regular redraft leagues and obviously underdog drafts. Now, going over and looking at T. Higgins, Higgins, super frustrating because if we take a step backwards and you look at the career averages on the site, it's very difficult to get a sense. It's like, oh, he averaged 18.5 fantasy points per game this season, but the year prior, 11.5. The year before that, only 13. However, this is what we talk about with T. Higgins every offseason. It's why we drafted the hell out of T. Higgins last year. T. Higgins has a few of these games every single year thrown into the sample where he just simply wasn't healthy. He didn't play, and it brings down his averages. Like we can go through in 2023, you can look at week 4. He only played 52% of the snaps. He only scores 4 fantasy points. In week 6, he played 55% of the snaps. He only scores 4 fantasy points. We can go through and look at week 17. He only plays 43% of the snaps. He only scores 3 fantasy points. So the games where Higgins actually played in 2023, he did score points outside of week 1. I'm going back to 2022. It's kind of the same situation. Week 1, he only plays 27% of the snaps, 4.5 fantasy points. Week 5, he plays 19% of the snaps, 0 fantasy points. Week 14, he plays 2% of the snaps, 0 fantasy points. But overall, if you look over the past 3 years and we actually just look at the games where T. Higgins was healthy and he played, you're looking at a wide receiver that's consistently finished as the high-end wide receiver 2 to a mid wide receiver 1 in points per game. Now, points per game, very different than total fantasy points. We go ahead and look at total fantasy points. The highest T. Higgins has ever finished is wide receiver 17. And the reason is the dude's played 1 season of 17 games in his entire NFL career. And again, we just looked at that 2022 season. Some of those weeks, he wasn't even really on the field. So Higgins can't stay healthy, but if he is healthy, you are going to get just crazy high ceiling. At least in the games where Burrow goes nuclear, but based off what we saw last season, seems like that should be very often. Now going over and looking at Tyreek, past 5 years, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2, and then the wide receiver 32, right? So the question that you need to ask is, 1, how much of this fall off was due to the Tua injury combined with a Tyreek Hill injury? If you think Tyreek's wrist injury legitimately affected him last season, and you think that the historical splits that we have of games where Tua plays, Tyreek crushes, and games where Tua misses, Tyreek's a bum. If you think Tua's healthy and Tyreek's healthy this next year, there is upside for Tyreek Hill to finish as a mid to high end wide receiver 1 yet again. Now, the concern that I have is with these speedy wide receivers, once they get into their 30s, and you see a fall off like we just had, you're always going to hear 1,000 excuses. And the reality of the situation, maybe he just lost a step. And once he loses a step, you're not going to get it back. Now, he had the 100-meter dash. I know a lot of people are excited about how fast he looked there. So it is just going to be up to you. The FSC guys absolutely love him. If you're looking at the site right now, he is on average the wide receiver 14, which is about exactly where we have him as well. I have Jackson Smith-Njigba here ahead of Garrett Wilson. One thing that's interesting on Underdog, and I know we just talked about drafting there, but they also have season-long pick'ems. And if you're looking at this range of wide receivers, you can see JSN in comparison to Garrett Wilson projects out very well from a volume perspective. Like, obviously, you're going to have concerns centered around the overall quarterback play of both receivers. But right now, JSN is higher, lower, 6.5 receiving touchdowns, 974.5 receiving yards. And we go ahead and look at Garrett Wilson. And this is a wide receiver that is projected to be in one of the lowest volume passing attacks in the NFL, where Underdog Fantasy has his higher, lower touchdown mark at 4.5 receiving touchdowns. And the reason for this is if you look at the projection on Justin Fields, where we historically have not seen Justin Fields have great passing numbers, Justin Fields is higher, lower, 14.5 passing TDs. So if I was choosing between the younger wide receivers here at the beginning of the third round, what I'm going to opt for is I'm going to opt for the guys we've seen good seasons from. We're very, very confident have the talent profile because we've seen it in the NFL. And I think that the passing volume is going to be a little bit better in Seattle than it will be for the Jets. I'm looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. I know Harrison obviously goes a lot earlier than this on Underdog. On Underdog, Harrison typically goes before Wilson, before JSN, before Tyreek Hill. And great prospect. He had some flashes. The issue is it just wasn't a good rookie season. He finishes as the wide receiver 42. Trey McBride just absolutely dominates the target share here in Arizona. And while I think you can make a bet on Harrison taking that next step and improving as a wide receiver overall, if I'm comparing him to like Garrett Wilson and JSN, we've already seen it from JSN. We've already seen it from Garrett Wilson. So I'm just going to go from the guys that we've seen the good prospect profiles from coming out of school, as well as the strong production in the NFL. Going over and looking at Davante Adams, every single smart person is on Davante Adams this year. Every single person is screaming, Adams is the best value in round 3. Go get Davante Adams. Go get him, go get him, go get him. And again, I'm ranking this as a tier list. I'm going to have Davante Adams in the same tier with Rice, Tyreek, JSN, Wilson. You rank these guys whatever order you want. With Adams, over the past 2 seasons, we've had pretty much the worst years of his NFL career since 2017. Both from just a fantasy points per game perspective at 15.5 fantasy points per contest, as well as 17.2. We go ahead and we look at the efficiency. You have 2.08 yards per route run this past year, 2.03 the year prior, which is much, much worse than what we had from 2022 through 2016. And now you're on your third offense with good quarterback play. But in my opinion, Puka Nacua with his 4 yards per route run this past year, stepping into his prime, where Davante Adams, I believe, turns 33 this season. I'm going to be betting on Puka to be the dominant alpha. I think Davante Adams could be a solid wide receiver 2 in fantasy. The difference between Adams and like T. Higgins for me at the top of this tier is I'm more confident with the passing volume in Cincinnati than I would be in Los Angeles. So you wanted to go Adams, not going to fault you whatsoever. He is higher on the rankings on the site than he is in my personal. Now, dropping down to tier 5, Terry McLaurin's one of my least drafted wide receivers on Underdog. Like, Terry McLaurin typically is going ahead of like Garrett Wilson, JSN, sometimes Davante Adams in these drafts. I'm just not really taking him there very often. If you look at all the statistics, whether it's the target share, the yards per route run, it doesn't matter what you're looking at. Everything stayed the same this past year than it was in previous seasons. However, Terry McLaurin posts the best year of his NFL career, finishing as the wide receiver 16 with 15.75 fantasy points. But it was all based off the touchdown rate. I mean, the touchdown rate just absolutely explodes with 13 touchdowns. His previous career high was 7. We have a lot of seasons with 4 and 5 touchdowns mixed in. I'm not necessarily saying that we're going back to the 4 or 5 touchdown Terry McLaurin as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. But I would be a little concerned that the touchdown regression does hit Terry to the point where maybe it goes down to 8 receiving touchdowns. Jaden Daniels has a few extra rushing TDs, maybe have slightly more target competition this year, or they're able to run the ball more effectively if Brian Robinson is healthy. Going over and looking at Mike Evans, Mike Evans continues to get older, and Mike Evans continues to get better. He has improved every single year over the past 4 years with his yards per route run. Going back to 2021, 1.76, then 2022, 1.94, then 2.38, 2.44. You look at his target share at 24% over the past 2 years. This was the highest mark that we have seen from Mike Evans since 2016, where he finishes the wide receiver 1 in fantasy and before Chris Godwin was drafted. So Evans has been absolutely crushing it. But what did it take this past year? It took 41 passing touchdowns from Baker Mayfield. And what just happened? You just had this team taking Puka in round 1 of the NFL draft. Mike Evans is another year older. Chris Godwin probably plays more than 7 games this next year as well. Jalen McMillan's going into year 2. So I'm personally a little concerned that the target competition may go up for Mike Evans. The passing volume in this offense may go down just a bit. And even though we've had zero signs of Mike Evans slowing down, at this age, similar to what we're talking about with Davante Adams, you can feel free to disagree with me. I'm always going to be concerned about father time catching up with these players. DK Metcalf will be our next guy. DK Metcalf, big time riser since we made this video last time. Over the past 3 years, his best finish ever was the wide receiver 20. Or the past 6 years, his entire NFL career, he's had one finish higher than the wide receiver 20, and that was back in 2020, where he finished as the wide receiver 8. So Metcalf's always been a low-end wide receiver 2. This past year, he was a wide receiver 3 in fantasy. But now you really don't have much target competition. Like, you're going up against friggin' Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin. In comparison to last season, you had to go up against JSN and Tyler Lockett. I am a lot more excited about Aaron Rodgers than I would have been Mason Rudolph. DK Metcalf was lower in these rankings because at the time, Mason Rudolph was the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I know a lot of people want to disagree with me on this for whatever reason. I don't know if they just hate Aaron Rodgers so much that they're going to make a losing argument. But I promise you, even washed up, old, horrible Aaron Rodgers, I know he's not MVP Rodgers, he's still a much better quarterback than Mason Rudolph would have been. And what we've seen in the past throughout his pretty much entire NFL career is he will lock on to that number 1 wide receiver and he will essentially make them viable. Xavier Worthy's been a faller in our ranks. With Worthy, he's falling in underdog drafts as well. And I think it's just simple. Rashid Rice is healthy. Rashid Rice isn't going to get suspended, right? So if Rice is moving up with expectations, I think by default, Worthy may need to fall a bit. Now, Worthy only played 67% of the snaps last season. He actually finished very strong over the past, the last 3 weeks of the regular season. He had 19.5, 20.5, and 23 fantasy points, averaging about 10 targets a game. Obviously, great real-life playoff stretch as well. This is a round 1 NFL draft pick attached to one of the best quarterbacks that we've ever seen. In an offense where Kelsey may be falling off, and I think the passing volume could be better this next season than what it's historically been over the past 2 years. So I like betting on round 1 wide receivers that had good rookie seasons going into year 2 in good offenses. So I'm going to continue to draft Xavier Worthy. Devonta Smith, in my opinion, is one of the best values in drafts right now, where he's going as a high-end wide receiver 3. I'm going to aggressively take him in the middle of the 4th round, especially if I think I can get Jalen Hurts in the 5th on Underdog. Because you're looking at a receiver that his worst finish over the past 3 years is wide receiver 18 from a points per game perspective. That's his worst finish. And he's getting drafted as a high-end wide receiver 3. I think his ADP right now is like wide receiver 27 in underdog drafts. And this is coming off a season in which the Philadelphia Eagles had by far and away the fewest pass attempts in the NFL. So if you're telling me that, again, going back to A.J. Brown, anything changes here in Philadelphia, the defense is a little bit worse, Barkley gets injured, or the games are just a little bit closer, I promise you the Philadelphia Eagles will throw the ball more this year than they did last year. And and I know this is a big if, and I'm not drafting Devonta Smith for this reason, but if A.J. Brown were to go down, Devonta Smith is immediately a wide receiver 1 in my rankings that week. So I'm going to aggressively draft Smith in round 4. I actually believe I took him in round 4 of the Flock League last year. I'm going over and looking at Ted McMillan. I think McMillan is a great prospect. You're looking at a receiver that had like 45% of his team's passing volume in college. Early declare, round 1 NFL draft pick. I mean, hell, top 10 NFL draft pick, and goes to an offense where he very easily can be the alpha this next season. My issue is I'm not a super big Bryce Young believer at this point. I know a lot of people disagree with me. And if you think Bryce Young's going to be an above average NFL passer, then by all means, rank Ted McMillan at the very top of this tier. I would disagree, however, if you tried to put Ted McMillan in the tier above. And then DJ Moore, wide receiver 29 this past season, but obviously much better offensive coordinator, much better offensive line. Presumably Caleb Williams is going to be better in year 2. So DJ Moore was set up to possibly be in a much better spot this next season. And then they drafted Loveland and they drafted Luther Burden and added additional target competition in this wide receiver room. So it's an interesting case with DJ Moore where it's like, yeah, the offense is going to be better, but yeah, more competition, even if Keenan Allen's gone. So it is kind of going to be up to you. Cortland Sutton's our next guy. With Sutton, I've drafted the hell out of him. I mean, again, wide receiver 27 from a points per game perspective last year. But if we go through and we look at once Bo Nix really took over in the second half of the season, weeks 9 onwards, 23, 19, 15, 29, 16, 12, 10, 16 and a half, and 20 fantasy points. If we are trying to figure out what we have with the target competition here, Marvin Mims played 27% of the snaps last year. Pat Bryant's not a special talent. Evan Ingram just got cut essentially from his previous team. So I don't think there's a lot of target competition. I think Bo Nix is a good quarterback. I think Courtland Sutton has been a receiver to have decent target share numbers through his NFL career. So if he can have 25% of Bo Nix's targets, I'm aggressively drafting Sutton this season. Jamison Williams has the breakout last year. I know everybody is in on Jamison Williams this year. It's kind of funny because I hear people go like, oh, Montgomery, you have to be worried. Jahmyr Gibbs, you have to be worried. Amon-Ra St. Brown, you have to be worried. Sam Laporta, you have to be worried. Everybody's worried about Ben Johnson leaving this offense, except when they talk about Jamison Williams and they act like Jamison Williams is immune to that fact. Again, I stand by. I think Jamison's a much better real-life receiver. I think he is phenomenal at stretching NFL defenses. I think that he creates space underneath for Sam Laporta, for Amon-Ra St. Brown. But for him to go through and be like a target dominant player, I just don't really see it happening. I mean, we can go through this past year. He averaged 3.9 receptions per game, right? So obviously in an underdog draft where you are just looking for spike weeks, he is going to be a little more appealing there. Travis Hunter will be our next name. Travis Hunter has been a faller in drafts lately just because the coaching staff came out and said yeah, he's playing on the defensive side of the ball for sure. Now, to what extent is he going to be on the defensive side of the ball? That's up to you to determine. If you think that he's going to be out there for 5 to 10 snaps a game where they just want Travis Hunter to be happy, they just want the good ESPN storyline, then at that point, Travis Hunter should be a serious target because he would be an elite wide receiver prospect coming into the NFL attached to a quarterback with upside. Now, the concern is if you take a wide receiver here at the 4-5 turn that may just be a defensive back over a player like Devonta Smith, you do have a lot of downside with that as well. Now, going over and looking at what we have with Calvin Ridley. Ridley, much better quarterback play. I'm actually a lot higher, I guess, than other people on the site with him. I have him as my wide receiver 29, whereas if you look at the expert average on the site, for whatever reason, is down at wide receiver 37. Over the past 3 seasons, Calvin Ridley has given you 14.5, 13.5, and 11.5 fantasy points per game. And arguably, he's about to have the best quarterback play that he has seen since 2020. I know that for whatever reason, nobody likes to project out Cam Ward the same way they did Caleb Williams last year. The same way that they did with Drake May last year. We can go back and you can look at the hype that we had around last year's rookie quarterback class. And everybody is looking at Cam Ward at the 101 at the moment and just assuming, it's going to be a bad Titans offense still. I think the Titans offense may be significantly improved upon where they were a year ago. And it's not like Calvin Ridley has that much wide receiver competition. They have a bunch of depth pieces that they threw in behind them. Zay Flowers will be our next guy. Maybe I'm just salty that we had a Best Ball Mania finals team with Zay Flowers and Flowers didn't do anything for us. But I'm always concerned about wide receivers that get worse from year 1 to year 2. He falls from 12.9 fantasy points per game down to 12.3. He falls from 86% of the snaps down to 76% of the snaps. Yards per route runs up. Target shares up. So the efficiency numbers look good. But this just doesn't appear to be a super high volume passing attack when Lamar Jackson can run it and Derrick Henry can. Now, if you're using these rankings on Underdog, you're not going to draft a lot of George Pickens. I will tell you that. And I know George Pickens has the best quarterback play of his entire NFL career this season. Now, at the same time, George Pickens also is going up against the best wide receiver of his entire NFL career in CeeDee Lamb, who I'd still project out to have a 25% team target share. I'm still ranking George Pickens as if he is going to have his best season of his NFL career. And yeah, you heard that right. I'm ranking him as the wide receiver 31, ranking him as if he is going to have the best season of his NFL career, because from a points per game perspective so far, he's finished as the wide receiver 45. He's finished as the wide receiver 35. He's finished as the wide receiver 38. In my personal opinion, and of course, do it with what you will, but George Pickens is one of those players that doesn't generate a lot of separation. He wins at the catch point with highlight grabs that look great on Twitter, that look great in TikTok cut-ups, that look great on ESPN. But at the end of the day, when you're sitting here at best with 7 targets a game, I just don't necessarily see the path for a wide receiver that's not generating a ton of separation to turn into a top 12 option when you're running alongside one of the other best receivers in the league. And if you thought George Pickens was the same level talent that you had with like T. Higgins, that you have with Travis Hunter, these other wide receiver twos that are being drafted highly, or with Devonta Smith, you would have assumed that Pittsburgh would have paid the man his money rather than just getting rid of him for nothing. So I'm just kind of going to listen to what the Steelers just did. And going through and looking at Jaylen Waddle in this last tier. Waddle, worst year of his NFL career, not even remotely close. Wide receiver 53. But if Tua is able to stay healthy this next season, I would assume, based off the historical splits, that you do get a small Waddle bounce back. I'm going over and looking at Jordan Addison. Y'all know last year is being drafted as the wide receiver 48 on Underdog. We made him our most drafted player. We printed money. He finishes the wide receiver 25. The back-to-back years where we're actually a little bit lucky when it comes to the efficiency of his touchdowns. You have 9 touchdowns off of 99 targets this past season. A concern that you have with Addison and why I'm going to be ranking him lower here than where we did last season. He finished the wide receiver 25 last year, but this next season, 1, you possibly have the suspension. 2, TJ Hawkinson's going to be healthy from the start of the season to the end of the season. And 3, while McCarthy has upside, he still is a black box. So Addison, a lot of question marks. Chris Godwin last season, absolutely dominant. Was the wide receiver 2 in points per game before he went down only behind Jamar Chase. But again, you're looking at a situation in which you're coming off a significant injury and they just drafted a wide receiver round 1 in Puka. Chris Olave and Jerry Jeudy are the same exact player for me. I talk about this in the live stream every single night. Every time we're in the middle of the 6th round, we bring this up. But Olave and Jeudy, in my opinion, are both talented receivers that are stuck in the worst offenses in the league with the worst quarterback play in the NFL. Now, I personally believe, based off Chris Olave having 3 straight seasons with over 2 yards per route run, where Olave in his 2 fully healthy seasons has had over a 25% team target share, Olave is the more talented and Olave is the more dominant receiver between the two. Now, if you wanted to go with Jerry Jeudy over Olave, I'm not going to fault you whatsoever. Jerry Jeudy this past year posted 14.17 fantasy points per game, which was almost as good as what Olave did in 2023. And obviously with Jerry Jeudy, you don't have the same concussion concerns that you do with Olave. So if you wanted to flip these receivers, by all means, go right ahead. I'm looking at Rome Odunze. Rome, horrible rookie season, 1.32 yards per route run. 8.5 fantasy points per game, but he had great NFL draft capital. Reasons to believe the Bears offense will be much, much better this year than it was last year. Rome going into year 2, Caleb going into year 2, better coaching staff, better offensive line. But again, you add Luther Burden and Loveland. And my big concern with both DJ Moore and Rome Odunze is this coaching staff gets in here and they go, well, you know what? We need Caleb Williams to succeed. We're going to look at all the roster. What are the biggest needs? Let's get Caleb Williams a new offensive line. Let's go spend a bunch of money in free agency. Let's not stop there. The new coaching staff that did not invest into Rome Odunze, did not sign off on Rome Odunze being a top 10 NFL draft pick. They went, yeah, with our top 10 pick this year, let's take a pass catching tight end. Ooh, with our second pick in the draft, let's go with another wide receiver. So I'm a little bit concerned of what that says with how this coaching staff views the pass catchers in Chicago, but it is up to you. Now, based off the Brandon Ayuk injury updates, I do think that we possibly need to move up the Niners receivers. Now, y'all know I'm of the opinion that Jawan Jennings is probably not the best player in the world, probably not the best wide receiver in the world. You're looking at a wide receiver that randomly breaks out at 27. In reality, CMC's injured, Ayuk's injured, Debo is fat with pneumonia. So, like, the Niners had no other options. It was just funnel everything through Kittle and then, I guess, scheme Jennings some big things. And you can go through and you can look at Jennings, and all this production came in a week 3 game against the Rams where the dude had 3 receiving touchdowns off of 12 targets. He drops 46 fantasy points. So Jennings has had 4 good games in his NFL career. We go back 2 years ago when there were actual pass catchers in San Francisco. And again, you didn't have Ayuk, torn ACL, Ricky Pearsall shot in the chest, CMC, Achilles from hell, and Debo Samuel fat. In 2022, 1.2 yards per route run. As an older wide receiver, it's not like he's 21 years old. It's not like he's 22 years old. So I'm a little concerned that Jennings just got propped up due to situation last season and is almost going to look like a one-year wonder. Ricky Pearsall also one good week last season. Week 17, 141 receiving yards off of 10 targets. That's great. But outside of that, you do get the round 1 NFL draft capital, but it's not like a lot of people were excited about that price tag of him. It's not like a lot of people thought that he was a great round 1 NFL pick. And you already had a hamstring pop up in camp. So Ayuk's injury looks serious. The Niners are going to be a great offense. I'm not a massive fan of Jennings. I'm not a massive fan of Ricky Pearsall, but just based off the quarterback, the offense, you may have to move him up. I'm looking at Josh Downs. The quarterback play is probably going to be better this year than it was last year. And this is a great coaching staff. This is a super fast-paced offense as well. Like you go through in terms of plays per second in game-neutral environments last year, second fastest offense in the league. And just in terms of games per second in general last year, the fastest offense in the league. Finishes the wide receiver 31, 2.21 yards per route run with the least accurate quarterback in the NFL. And now you probably have Daniel Jones. And if you don't have Daniel Jones, that means Anthony Richardson's better this year than he was last year. So Josh Downs looks like a great pick. Jacoby Meyers, Brock Bowers going into year 2. You add in a running back that's going to be the focal point of the offense. You draft a wide receiver in round 2 of the draft. You draft another wide receiver on day 3. New coaching staff. So a lot changing in Las Vegas. A new quarterback as well. But you have back-to-back finishes as a top 24 wide receiver for Jacoby Meyers. So super high floor player where like on Underdog where you don't have the waiver wire and you just need somebody that you know is going to be giving you baseline set of production. Meyers could be a great pick. Matthew Golden I didn't love as a prospect. Like honestly, if Igbuka went to Green Bay, I would have Igbuka up here probably as like wide receiver 35 or so. Like we'd have Igbuka very aggressive. But Matthew Golden didn't love the prospect profile. However, it's the perfect situation. With Khalil Shakir, didn't love him last year. I know a lot of people wanted to clown on me for that. And like somebody made a TikTok edit of me saying that I didn't think Shakir is a great receiver. And the only reason we even think of him is because he was attached to Josh Allen. And y'all know how many games Shakir had with over 20 fantasy points last season? 1. How many games Shakir had with over 22 fantasy points last year? 0. Ceiling severely capped. However, I actually like Shakir more this year than I did last year. The price isn't much more expensive at all. He goes like a round earlier, despite us actually seeing great improvements from year 2 to year 3, jumping up to 61% of the snaps, jumping up to 6.7 targets, 5.1 receptions, 54 receiving yards, 2.32 yards per out run, 23% team target share. So Shakir quietly had a much better season in 2024 than he did in 2023. However, because people were so excited about him being that next breakout and he didn't actually win leagues, I feel like people are kind of off Shakir. They've given up, but I'm more likely to draft him this year at the same price. Because if you have positive touchdown regression for the passing TDs in Buffalo, I think this could be one of the biggest benefactors. Stefon Diggs, if he's healthy, he's set up to crush with a great quarterback and an improved coaching staff. Now, the issue is your wide receiver in your 30s coming off significant injury. Ayuk's coming off significant injury as well. Ayuk was worse than Diggs in the games that they played last season. Ayuk's younger than Diggs. Ayuk's probably in a better offense than Stefon Diggs. But from everything that I've read, it seems like Ayuk's injury is more serious. We're just trying to make a hard stance against Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel, wide receiver 49 last year, in the perfect situation possible. Now you go over to an offense with an elite quarterback, but with a quarterback that's going to run a ton. Go look at Lamar Jackson with what his wide receivers look like in Baltimore. I'm not saying Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, but just typically these quarterbacks that are going to go out there and run for 800 rushing yards in a season, it does negatively impact the wide receiver ceiling that you have. The Niners give up on Deebo, just get his contract off the books. Jaden Reed, again, going back to what we talked about with, I want to say Zay Flowers. Not a massive fan of wide receivers that get worse from year 1 to year 2. And I know everybody's going to say, well, Mason, what we need to do is we need to ignore the games in which Jordan Love was injured. We need to ignore week 2. We need to ignore week 3 where they didn't throw the ball at all. Well, realistically, even if we take into account passing volume, he only had 16.2% of his team's target share. Jaden Reed through the entire season had 1 game with more than 6 targets. Passing volume wasn't there, and this team went and significantly invested in a wide receiver this offseason. So, not a big read guy. Going and looking at Darnell Mooney, I know a lot of sharp people are a lot higher on Mooney than I am. Darnell Mooney's best finish ever in his NFL career was wide receiver 28. So the highest ceiling that we've ever seen from Darnell Mooney is a high-end wide receiver 3. And you're going into year 6 of your NFL career with what is thought to be a true alpha wide receiver running alongside you with a question mark at quarterback. Quarterback with upside, but we don't know who he's going to be like. Michael Pittman Jr., you go back 2 years ago, wide receiver 13. 3 years ago, wide receiver 19. 4 years ago, wide receiver 24, with some of the worst quarterback play in the entire NFL. He had a broken back last season. Michael Pittman Jr., one of my most drafted wide receivers in fantasy at this point. I think probably have a low ceiling, but I think you have a high floor. Looking at Cooper Kupp. Kupp, the fall off from a fantasy points per game perspective over the past 2 seasons, but in reality, yards per route run, 2.1, not that bad. Target share, 26%. So it looks like just over the past 3 years, Cooper Kupp hasn't stayed healthy, but when he's been on the field, he's been effective. Now you're going to have worse coaching staff, worse quarterback play, and you're the wide receiver 2 behind JSN, right? So I'm not going to sit here and act like Cooper Kupp is the best player in the world. Puka, love, and I mean love the prospect profile. The issue is going to be you're looking at a player that's potentially parked behind Godwin as well as Mike Evans. So if Godwin does not play the beginning of the season, Puka may be a smash. But long-term, he's the wide receiver 3 in an offense that had a lot of passing volume last year but could regress. And then Jaden Higgins is our last option. Offense with upside if they're able to get back to what they were with CJ Stroud as a rookie. But you do have a true alpha playing alongside him with Nico Collins. Now, obviously, our rankings go deeper than this on the site. If you wanted to go through and if you wanted to look at them, head over to flockfantasy.com. We'll be updating everything there as we always do. But if you wanted to draft with us, which we're doing in the live stream every single night, you can find the link to Underdog Fantasy in the description, in the comment section. If you use promo code FLOCK, you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, you'll get all our 2025 fantasy football draft guides for your ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo leagues, fully customized to your exact league settings. It's going to be a lot, but I really appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day, and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later tonight.